Hi folks, we're Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the recent announcement from the US federal government, the Trump administration, that there are somewhere in the region of 55 million, I'm not sure they know exactly, but 55 million non-citizen visa holders roaming around the United States. And that doesn't, as I understand it, doesn't include the 30 odd million illegals. Now, no one knows how many illegals in the United States. So this would mean that somewhere in the region of between 85 and 90 million people are in the United States who are not American citizens, not US citizens. Now, it seems like a staggering number, but I don't know what the baseline should or could be. So we'll come back to that in a minute, but 90 million. Now, if we assume the population is 330 million, but if we add to this the number of illegals that nobody knows about, that we could be talking something in the region of population of the US, maybe 360, 370 million in terms of total number of persons that are there. And that's probably more like it. Now, the problem with wherever there's been mass migration, the problem is that the number of illegals roaming around where the government or the authorities have either purposefully or inadvertently lost track of. For example, there's somewhere in the region of 2 million illegals in the United Kingdom. And that's with a population of 65 million or something, high 60, 70 million. And there's 2 million illegals that they just don't know where they are, on top of millions of asylum seekers that haven't yet, or alleged asylum seekers that haven't yet had the verdicts rendered on their claims for asylum, and those who are supposed to be deported but not yet deported. So we're talking millions of people, no matter how you, many millions, how many you look at it. So to get the precise numbers and work out, what category of visa, whether it be visa overstay or illegal or something, that's another matter. I don't know if there are definitive breakdowns on that. I certainly haven't seen any, or none that are reliable. The government, I just don't believe anything Western governments put out anymore. They say, there's only 20,000 visa overstays, then the number's probably 10 times, 20 times that. So they're always trying to understate the problem. Now, let's have a look at these visas. Now, I've visited the US on business a gazillion times, and sometimes I get waved through. Other times, the checking is quite rigorous, but there are some basic things they look for. This is a business visa where I'm coming in on business. No intention of staying for say, maybe a couple of months max, but no longer than that. Most of the time, the visiting the US is 2 or 3 weeks, in my case anyway. So what do they look for when you arrive? Now, primarily I'd arrive at Los Angeles, sometimes San Francisco, sometimes I'd come around from the other way from Europe and I'd come into Dallas Fort Worth Airport, or sometimes Austin Airport. Anyway, it went something like this: that they would examine your ticket or examine your travel things to make sure that you had already a booked ticket to leave the US. So if you came in with a ticket just to arrive in the US but no outgoing ticket, then they wouldn't let you in. They'd say, no, you have to have a ticket to leave the US. Otherwise, we're not going to let you in. So it's pretty stringent on that regard. Now, I never got caught on that because I always had a ticket to go out, because I was typically going to visit a number of other places around the world. So I always have. The second thing I'd say, you need to have a plane ticket to go out. The next thing that I look for is, do you have other destinations on your ticket? That was also important. I'm not precisely sure why, but I think it added to your bona fides that you were a genuine business traveler and not someone trying to come into the US and just disappear into the population. So I always had that. So that was like another good sort of tick there. So I've got a ticket to leave the US, plane ticket to leave the US, and I'm also going to other destinations such as London or Hong Kong or Tokyo or I don't know, wherever, but other destinations. So, and then the last thing, or two other things they look for, they then say, well, do you have a card, like a business card from the company that you work at? And so I always had that, so I gave them that. Now, I mean, the way they'd ask the codes, they'd sort of put this, the customs officer put this look at them, yeah, have you got a business card? But it was said in such a way, yeah, gotcha, motherfucker. But I always had the business card, so that was, all right. And then the last thing they said, well, if you, and they phrase it like, oh, I've got you this time. They phrase it, well, if you're doing business like you say, you'd have a business suit with, white shirts and neckties and things, those sort of things, like business attire, because they're traveling on the plane, especially the flight from Sydney to LA. It's like 14 hours or something. So, I don't want to be sitting there in a suit, but so I'm dressed casually. And so I'd get to the, and I'd have the suit bag, carrying my business suits, business attire. And, I had to lay that out on the bench and unzip it. And the guy would then look at the suits and look at, the white shirts, the business shirts, that sort of thing. And all right then, and that would be it. I'd go through. But I travel sometimes with colleagues, and they only had they'd heard that you could get much cheaper flights in the US to come out of the US. So they decided they'd just have a flight to go to the US. Then they'd arrange a cheaper flight going out, and they thought they were, hot shit. They're going to game the system type thing. And they wouldn't let them in. They had to actually buy another plane ticket, like to leave the US, before they would be allowed into the US and given the visa stamp. But I never had that problem. There was a big crackdown during the Reagan years, and I was only a young guy, sort of early on. There's a big crackdown in the Reagan years, and especially given I was young, where they were there were people coming in on business, particularly Indians, things like that, coming in on business and then deciding to stay, overstay their visa. And but I never. Not being from India, I didn't get too much trouble with that, but they did. You could tell there was a bit of a nervousness there. They were being told to look out for particularly younger people, I think, was more the issue. But it wasn't a problem. Again, I ticked all the boxes that would convince them I was a genuine bona fide business traveller. And I remember in those days they would ask, well, who are you going to talk to while you're here? And there was always big brand name companies. They even tried to get clever. Okay, who are you going to see? And, I'd have to give a name like Billy Bob Smith. Here, have you got his phone number? And I did, because I was having to contact him and have a meeting with him. So, and then they would nod and just wave you through. And often I would be asking for, say, a 1 month visa, but they'd give me a 3 month visa without me even having to ask for it. And I guess there was two levels of it. Firstly, you'd get a visa from, say, the US Embassy in Australia. Then you would get confirmation of your entry. So it was like a two-part process there. But I never really had a problem, and it was never an issue for me. But it was reasonably stressed. So I'm surprised people can, the number of people that get into the US legitimately can get into the US on visas. I mean, how do they do that? Do they have a flight out and then cancel that flight or something? I don't know. But what's the now? 55 million people. I don't know whether that's, again, I've got no baseline to work from. Seems like a lot, but 55 million people in the US. And now some of those people will be visitors, tourists. They want to go to, I don't know, Disneyland or something, Universal Studios and so on. They want to go there and they want to see, I don't know what else, the Grand Canyon and so on. So some of those would just be visitors, tourist visitors wanting to go on. There's a lot of package tours where a lot of people go on those. So you'd have, I would assume, millions of people in that category. Then you'd have people coming to visit relatives because, again, there's quite a large migrant population in the US, South America and India and so on. So you've got visitors, family members coming to visit and stay and maybe stay for a little while and, I don't know, spend time with the grandkids, all those sorts of things. and then you'd have business travelers like me who are coming in all the time. And given the size of the US economy and how big it is, it's like still close to a fifth of the total world economy. Then there's a lot of people visiting on business. I've been one many times. And so there'd be a business population there, I would assume, of a million plus at any time. But as much as I try to get to 55 million with the amount of tourists, visitors, people visiting relatives, I can't get anywhere near to 55 million. So we've got to assume there's a lot of scams going on there, and not just simply visa overstays, although there'd be a lot of those. Now it's a little bit difficult. Do they include visa overstays in the illegal immigrant population? Is it people who just sort of gate crash through the back door or something? Is it visa overstays? Is it what is it exactly? And I don't know how they're breaking down those categories, and it all seems a bit vague. So there could be a double count. Maybe visa overstays are non-citizen sort of residents, or is it let's say students, for example, as well would be in that category, or is it people that have done visa overstays or outright illegals that have gate crashed, through the southern border. There needs to be more work. I don't think anyone actually knows, and that would have been lost. They would have lost control of the precise numbers there anyway. All the gotaways and that sort of thing. But coming back to the thing there. The visa scam or the overstay or the non-resident visas, it can be people that I've known people that have arrived when they were 20 years old from, I don't know, Greece or somewhere, come to Australia, and they were, because they wanted to go back to Europe or to Greece frequently, they kept their Greek citizenship, but they got some sort of long-term residency in Australia. And before, I think it was before 1966, if you were from Britain, from England, coming to Australia, you automatically became I think this is true, automatically became an Australian citizen. Then before sort of 1970, but after 1966, if you came from Britain, you got like automatic unrestricted residency, and you could vote and do all sorts of shit. But then it changed again. So the laws were constantly changing as to what constituted citizenship and how you became it. And I think the same thing in varying degrees and ways happened in the United States as well. Now, looking at the wider diaspora of residents or people staying in the US that are not citizens that may still have some sort of a valid visa of some sort, like, I don't know, a tourist visa that had no time limit or something like that. Now, what's happened with a lot of these migrant groups is they bring in, the relatives or people from the village, the peasant village or so on, and bring them in, grandparents and the like, bring them in as just visitors. And then they look after the children in the household and, make sure the dinner's cooked and the carpet is vacuumed. And so, they do all that sort of stuff while all the adults that are capable of work go out working, whether it be as toilet cleaners or, in the takeout chicken shop. It doesn't matter. But or maybe they've got some hole in the wall takeout food business that will only be viable if they have peasant-free, cheap, slave peasant labor working there, and all these sort of things. So they have to bring older people out so that can't really work, but who can look after the household and finger wag the children to do their homework when they come back from school or something. So all this sort of stuff. So they have now in all these communities, the Chinese and the Indian and any peasant third world community, they even the Philippines, they all have these arrangements where they bring in the older, which is the structure they have, by the way, back in their home countries. And from a hard-nosed economic sort of perspective, it makes sense because, or it has a practical element to it, because then all adults that are working as you go out to work, even the kids that are at school, on weekend they do work, or they've got their shift at the local takeout food shop or in the family business, all this sort of stuff. But they still need someone at home to do the shopping and cook the meals, and so that the working people are freed from that day-to-day stuff, and they can concentrate on working and bringing money in the door. So this is very much a structure. So you've got millions, if not tens of millions, of people who are in that category. So what would happen if people that were not citizens were, relatively recent arrivals? What would happen if they were all deported? That would involve some major readjustments in the economy, I would think. But nonetheless, when you're looking at numbers like that, they claimed 55 million on top of, in addition to the 30 million illegals, then the problems or challenges facing the US are considerable. Now, as people are assuming deportations take place, I hope they do, but assuming deportations take place, they should at least, I think, have a, can you speak the language? And if it's people that are either non-integrated or non-integratable, then they should be deported. If they're integratable, their English is good, and then there's a case, I think, for looking at keeping them, and assuming they've got some value add perspective to the economy, and or they're looking after somebody, things like that. But either way, you'd be looking at tens of millions of people to be deported just out of those categories. Or you demand, look, if you're going to stay here, you need to become a US citizen, and these are and you have to meet a high bar. You have to be able to speak the language well. You can't have gringo. You have to be able to speak the language well, and you have to have valid driver's license. You have to be in a if you've got a valid driver's license, you speak the language well. You're capable of doing all your shopping, interacting with government departments, that sort of thing. Then at this point you're integratable, and maybe in those are cases where people should stay or be offered the opportunity to, again, with a high bar, rigorous sort of examination, become American citizens. And I think that would be workable. But interesting times ahead with this, and I had no idea the numbers were so big. But there you go. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.